You want me to introduce you? I'll just let you.
Okay. Good to go? Okay, I think we'll get started here. So my name is Kyler Johnson. Just a little bit of background about myself. Live in Tremont, Utah. Lived in Box Elder County for pretty much my whole life. Just, I guess, recently I got into farming the last 6 years. Graduated from Weber State and found myself on a dairy farm. And that's where I've been for the last 6 years. Mainly stuck in on the farming and really grew a passion for farming. Had a lot of opportunity to grow in that and kind of push some of the ideas that I've had and developed. I shouldn't say developed, but got my hands on anyway. And compost is one of those things. So we've composted at the dairy for every bit of the last 10 years, probably longer than that. And then I've really come in with wanting to produce a high quality microbial compost for agricultural use, I guess, field use. So that's what I've been working on the last 2 years. So there's a picture of one of our compost rows and my, at the time, 3-year-old. And he's kind of funny with the compost. As I became passionate about it and got into it, he also became passionate about compost. And I don't know how many 3-year-olds talk about compost and wanting to put compost in his garden bed to make it better. But that's what we did. So we bought a house up in Tremont 2 years ago. And when I was moving in, my next door neighbor came over, introduced himself. We got talking about, what I do and farming and his passion. He's got a garden, a little greenhouse in his backyard. And we got talking about that. And he warned me that the soil in that subdivision is fairly new, within the last 10 years, is not great. And those subdivisions, old farm ground subdivisions, they pull off the topsoil and ship it away, and you're left with a subsoil clay, and that is exactly what we had. He had lived in that house for 8 years, and he hadn't planted grass, hadn't done anything, just because he felt like the soil quality was so poor. And he had been buying, municipal compost, I guess I'll say, if you call it that. I mean, some of it is all right, but and trying to amend his own soils. So we decided we were going to plant a garden, at least try it. Sunk a shovel in the dirt, and what did I find? Exactly what he told me I'd find. Not a single worm, hard ground, cloddy ground. And, I just took a shovel, opened it up, and I just was left with bowling balls in my garden bed. So we took some of that compost, brought it in, spread it out on our grass, spread it into the flower beds, and what I'm left with today, 1 year later, I can go into my flower bed and I can scoop it with my hand, open it up, and I can tell the structure of the dirt has changed. I mean, it's now a looser soil, something that is able to, take in the water. Something like the water doesn't sit on my garden beds anymore, and that's just with 1 year of use. So I've seen it small scale. We're trying to implement it large scale on the farm. I'm always looking to improve the quality of our ground, improve the quality of our crops. We're a dairy farm first and foremost. We have blessings and curses, I guess, with manure and some of the products we have. I mean, we don't have to go out and buy anything. We're self-produce everything we use in our compost. So that, in that case, that's a positive for us, and we use it as a positive. And then, I'm always trying to learn and grow. I've, graduated from Weber State in biology and chemistry. I have a passion for learning. I'm always looking for new research, new people to learn from. And so as the time continues, I'm fairly new into the compost. I'm always tweaking things, and within the last 2 years, I have 2 completely different recipes, a product that are very similar to each other. So I'm confident that we can get the right results with what we've got. So we'll look into that a little bit. That's a picture of our compost yard, Tuesday morning, I believe. So we've already started turning what we've been putting in. So over the winter, as the ground freezes, we're able to get in there. And we'll talk a little bit about recipe and what we use. We have a lot of straw pack, if anyone's familiar with dry lot, feedlots, bedding with straw bales and cornstalk bales. We're pretty wet during the winter typically, and so we build up a bed that they can get out of the wetness and be dry and clean. And so then we go in during the winter when we have to, and especially during the summer, clean those beds out, clean out those packs so that we can start fresh or relatively fresh the next year. And so we've been piling it up, making new lines as we can during the winter. And so we've started, I think February 1st, he started turning compost on the ground so he can get onto it. It's been so dry or frozen. There's an overhead. That's one of our dairies. So I guess maybe I should back up a little bit, talk about the dairies. So we're milking on 3 different dairies, about 1,000 cows each. And then we have a calf replacement program, running about 3,000 cows out of that, or heifers out of that program as well. And they're just, we're within 3-4 miles of all the dairies and feedlot and everything, so we're relatively close. And so you can see, I think that's about 15 acres worth of compost yard. We can usually squeeze in about 20 lines. They're each about 1,000 feet long. I don't remember the number of cubic yards just off the top of my head, but we use every bit of it, either on ground or bedding for the cows. And we'll typically get through at least 2 rounds of compost in a year. Try for the third. Usually we'll pile it in and then let it sit for the winter until we can get turning it again. But 2, yeah, go ahead. For putting it on fields or? Well, no. So I've only been applying it once per year in the fall to my alfalfa ground, and I've done a little bit of corn as well. Some of the ground that's going into corn in the spring, but I've only had enough to do my alfalfa ground so far, and I'll just apply it once, 3 tons per acre is what I've been doing. I think as I build up the biology in the ground and get where I want to be, we can back that off a little bit, maybe go 1.5. But currently we're doing 3, and part of that is because I already have my spreader truck set up that way, and it's not easy to change it. So, and I'll do 2 rounds of compost a year as well. I'll try to get 2 batches out, I guess. So it's usually 14, 15 weeks. We'll spend a week or 2, whatever it takes, to clean out and haul off all that compost so we can pile it in our storage area, and then we'll bring in new material and start over again. So that depends on, running the mixer, running the turner, depends on the timing of how long it's been in the line. So up front, the first 3-4 weeks, we're about every day on those lines. They're cooking pretty quickly. We've developed recipes, and I can get a little bit more into that. I should have brought my little file. I've got an Excel spreadsheet thing that I've put programs into to punch out what I need recipe-wise according to different parameters that I've given it. But yeah, those first 3-4 weeks are critical. We're heating it up, killing any bad bacteria out of the compost or the manure for good clean compost. Because you got to remember, there's maybe 20 lines, 22 lines in that compost yard. 2 of those lines are going for field compost at the moment. The rest of that is purely bedding compost. And I'll get into the difference here in a second, but those first 3 weeks, depending on temperatures, depending on the smell, at least Doug, the guy that's been running the turner and kind of managing the compost yard, he's done it long enough. He can kind of get a feel. He can go around, smell things, feel it, run the temperature probe through it, and kind of know when to turn it. That's kind of when we're basing our turning. So I say every day, but there's times that, hey, it didn't hit temperature today, or it still has oxygen to burn through, so we're going to let it go another day. So I say every day, but it just kind of depends. And then as it progresses, as it's broken down, starting to cool off process and curing process, we might be once a week just to get things aired up. So in our composting operation, we make the bedding compost. That's our biggest product that we're making right now. We also do a mortality compost with the dead animals that we have, and then the field compost, and that's relatively new to us. We've been doing the other 2 for, like I said, 12 or 10, 15 years. I've only been a part of it for the last 6, but so the picture on the left is our bedding compost. So you can tell it's fibrous. So we're basically flash heating it. We want to kill all the bugs, pathogens, because this is what's going in our freestall beds for the cows to lay on, be comfortable. They need to be comfortable, clean, dry. And so that's a dry, and you stick your hand in it, and it's spongy. It's not dense and solid. And it's been really good to us. We've tried making the compost on the right. That was initially what we've been making for bedding compost, and it's a little bit more dense. It's what we're using in fields. It's more broken down. The fibers aren't there. If cows go lay on it, they're wet from the rain or whatever, pee on it, whatever you want to do, it packs down hard. And I've spent many hours with the rest of the farm crew shoveling, and it's not fun. So we've progressed more into the fibrous, so we get it hot, we kill the pathogens, it stays fibrous, we don't break it all the way down into, you know, more of a dense, earthy compost, and then we apply it to the beds. And we actually have beds at the dairy, bedded with sand right now, and they've taken tests to check for somatic cells and check for bacteria and everything in the sand beds, and then checked all the compost beds, and the compost actually scored better than the sand, being cleaner. And maybe some of that's management of it, I don't know, I'm not really involved in that part of it, but we've been really pleased with the bedding compost that we've been making. The mortality compost, that's what we had been spreading on the fields. It's really nutrient rich. I mean, it's pretty much dead cows and you know, the pressed manure currently is what we're using, a little bit of straw to get it, and then that's turned, it's not turned every day. So that'll usually get piled up in a line, sit for, I can't remember what Doug said, maybe a month, 2 months, and then he'll go in and turn it, and then just as it maintains temperature, he'll go in and turn it as needed, and it's turned less, but then we're left with very few bones, especially the last few years that we've been doing it. We've been more aware of the process of composting and how to achieve what we want. And there was times before that we would haul off out of the compost, the dead cow compost. We were hauling off maybe 5 to 10 truckloads, dump truckloads of bones. And now the last 2 years we've hauled off 1.5, maybe 2. So the composting process has actually been breaking down the bones pretty well. And really all we're left with is the bigger, like femurs, and we get some vertebrae in there, a few rib bones here and there, but for the most part it's broken down and in that compost, which has been what we've been putting on our fields. We've been pleased with it. In the last class, somebody asked if we noticed any problems with it being oily. I guess where he's from, somebody's making mortality compost, it's kind of oily, spread it out on fields, and the rains or the water gets on it, and it can't soak into the ground. We haven't had that problem, I don't think ever. I mean, the dead cow compost looks almost identical to that picture on the right. So it's been pretty good. And that's the stuff, like I said, we've been putting on our fields. Our neighbors have been buying it. And that's kind of, now I'm putting into the field compost. I want to take it to the next step. That's the goal. Taking our field compost to the next step, whether that's management of the recipe, management of turning, being more aware of what's going on and when things are getting critical, and the being aerobic and avoiding anaerobic conditions is critical for that, is what I've been noticing. So why do we compost? Kind of covered that a little bit. We have a ton of raw materials. I mean, we either put up or buy about 10,000 straw bales. That's what we try and aim for. That's our goal. And we go through every bit of those during the winter to keep our cows strawed, clean, dry, healthy. And so when we have to clean that out, I mean, you can imagine the pens, they get pretty piled up. I mean, we get mountains on them. And towards the end of the season, it's hard to get the tractors up there to spread it out. The other reason, and this is newer to us, is we want to limit the amount of liquid manure application on fields. So if you're familiar with the dairy, tons of manure, we have to spread that out on the field somewhere. We got to get rid of it. And so we've got 5 spreader trailers, one of those big Gia tanks, like the 7,500 gallon ones, and we spread them out on fields. And the problem with that, at least for us, is one, we're adding compaction. I mean, each field, I think the next slide maybe gets into, yeah. I mean, each field's 200 to 400 loads depending on size. So you can imagine 200 to 400 times the tractor and trailer loaded up with 3,500 gallons of manure, that puts a toll on your headlands, puts a toll on the bottom of your field, puts a toll on the equipment that you got and the operators that you got. Nobody likes hauling manure, especially me. But so we have to put numbers in to I don't know, for our CAFO permits, I guess, and we figure we run about 5,700 loads a year, which, I mean, do the math, you're every minute 20 million gallons of waste throughout the year that you got to get rid of. We have problems with compaction. We have problems with nutrient loss, because at least for us, when we're putting it on with spreader trailers, you can't, we're not injecting that straight into the ground. And there's evidence to show that, to gain the most out of your manure, you got to till it in right away or somehow get it in the ground. So as it sits on top, at least for us, we have to wait until it dries out until we can get a tractor on it and mix it in. And we get quite a bit of nitrogen loss that way. And then it takes extra work. I mean, there's times that you're working the ground at least one, but if not 2 or 3 more times, 3 more passes across the field just to work that in. So there's kind of our setup at our Sunray dairy. So this is running about, I think this one is 1,000 cows, and everything gets scraped into one pit. I'm pretty sure it's 5 million gallons of holding capacity, and about every 4 months we got to go in there and clean it out, and it takes us 2 weeks. So we're running 5 spreaders, 6 spreaders at times, pump tractor, 5 to 6 guys. We're looking like $50,000 every 2 weeks to run this operation and get rid of manure, and then we're doing that at each dairy. So it gets costly for us to be doing that. And then every time your farm crew is sitting there hauling manure, they're not doing something else. So there's that problem as well. Things get backed up a bit. People complain that they need stuff cleaned out. I mean, it's just a never-ending circle with manure at times. So there's a picture of them out in the field, and this was, I think, last year. And it's really watery in this picture. This is a video. Yeah. So I'll pause it for a sec. Oh, whoops. That's not what I wanted to do. So I'll pause it for 1 second. So on the right-hand side, that's where they're coming out with the pit. And with the partnership of NRCS, we're actually putting in a separator, manure separator system, so that it'll pump all that liquid manure across the separator, press out the water, drop the solids, and just the way that's set up, we had to add extra holding capacity. So where that tractor is, down there with the scraper bucket on it, about 1/3 of that, you can kind of see where the soil's dark. That was the boundary of our old holding evaporative pond. So all the milk, barn water and manure coming out of the barn, mostly water, would actually get pumped into a separating pit and then gravity flow over into that holding pond. So we actually had to gain capacity there to do this. So I think the manure pit will continue to be a water holding with this new setup. So we got 5 million gallons there, and then the lagoon's about 6 acres, 4 feet deep, and it comes out to be about just under 5 million gallons of holding water as well. Now the other added benefit, maybe I'll get into it again later if I don't forget. In that top left corner of that lagoon, we actually have a head gate, and that ditch is not a ditch anymore. You can see all the black pipe, that's piped. And in our other dairies with the manure or the lagoon water, we've actually been piping it out to pasture, grass pasture. And that grass loves that red water for some reason. And so we're looking to do that again. We've got neighbors down there, old Joel Ferry, he loves it. If we ever put pasture in that field or anything, need to get rid of water, we can just pull the head gate, put it out on the field. So that's another added benefit there. See if I can continue that video, but it does not want to keep going. So this is just them spreading manure. I mean, it's miserable work if you've ever done it. You can see a pile there of that bedding compost we got piled there. They're loading it into a little spreader, go put it in the beds. Usually do that about twice a week in each dairy, just to keep them fresh. But back to my point of why that's so watery, we had to shut down that lagoon so that they could build the separator. So that pit fills up a little bit faster because it's taking all the barn water with it. Yeah, it is a shitty job. Literally, yeah. Yeah, no, thankfully my laundry room's right off the garage, so as soon as I get home I have to strip down, wash my own clothes, take a shower, which isn't all bad, I guess, but.
So this is right on your field, this isn't just set up your compost.
Nope, that is right on the fields. That is what we're currently doing for manure management until these separators go in. So we actually bought one ourselves at the Harper Dairy, the one with the compost yard. So that's where we're getting, or we have been getting, that pressed manure from, is that separator system. And that one, we didn't really know what we were doing design-wise. We struggled at times with rock and sediment and fine particulate getting stuck in our evaporative ponds. So with this new one, I think we've got past that and designed it a little better. Like I said, working with the NRCS to get that designed and get everything good, and we're pretty excited about it. We're just about ready. Well, I think they fired it up once to test it, but we're currently emptying that holding pit all the way before we start it, because that's going to be water storage, that initial phase of water storage. It's fine particulate sediment. But yeah, you can imagine, I mean, this is maybe a drastic case because the pit was overflowing at the time. So usually we try to get out there when it's frozen so we're not leaving tracks and adding to the compaction. But you can just see the damage that does to the fields. And imagine what it does. And I can promise you that the corn struggled right there. And it usually does. And we're very limited at this dairy with where we can take manure. We have 150 acres of our ground pretty close. And we like to keep alfalfa in that rotation, so obviously that 40 to 60 acres is off the plate. I mean, there's no manure going on that ground. Actually, this field was alfalfa coming out of alfalfa, so that's why we felt like it's okay to maybe apply heavily to this, because it hasn't had manure in at least 5 years. But it got put on so heavily, and then, you know, if you ever get a rainstorm or something, then it just puts you back. So I think this field in particular, by the time it got all the way spread, we had to wait for it to dry down, disked it at least twice, and then it was still so nasty and slimy that if it didn't get disked again, it very least got plowed with a moldboard plow. And then, then you got to level it out and make sure it's all good to go, and then finally got planted. So by the time it got planted, it was dry, dead, drought conditions. I mean, the corn struggled in that field, at least on this side. So here's a picture of the manure separator. So on the right-hand side, that is what comes out as the solids. It's still pretty moist. I mean, you can squeeze it and maybe get a little bit more water out of it. But it's going to be pumped out of that middle picture, so that's going to be our new holding manure scrape pit. And then it'll get pumped up into the separator. Gravity flow, and that's just a screen. The water that's going to fall out of it falls out of it. A little bit of fine particulate comes out of it as well. And then drops down. There's a roller there at the bottom, and it just presses the rest of the water out and just drops out the solids. So that's been a good source of compost fodder, I guess. And you can imagine, 5,000 gallons of manure 3 times a year, we got a problem out there. And so if we're going to separate all that, I'm going to be left with a lot of green waste. That's what we call it, green waste. So now, what are we going to do with all this green waste? What do we do with the solids that are left over from this? well, we can spread them. We've talked about buying spreader trucks and just spreading it out, light layer on the field. You know, it's going to be better than a slinger. But I took it upon myself to use it in the compost recipe. I want to use 100% of that, put it in my compost recipe. So that was my driving force with the compost recipe. Like I said, I really wish I would have brought that Excel sheet to show you how that all works. But basically, I have parameters in there. I say, oh, I want 30 carbon to nitrogen ratio starting materials. I want, 50% moisture. I want, level 2 or level 3 porosity, total, average porosity and this and that. And then I know what my starting materials are. I've had them tested. So I kind of know where they sit, carbon to nitrogen ratio, what their porosity is, what their, what their electronegativity is. I know those things, and so I put those in, and then I say, I want to focus on the green waste. I want like 50% or more green waste, and then it punches out, oh, you need this many tons of straw pack, you need this many tons of, rotten straw bales or something. And so then that's how I built the recipe. So the driving force was using the green waste, because as soon as that separator gets going, we're going to have a problem out there. And we're going to need to do something with those solids. So this is the first year I made my compost lines, and I've got clay on top of it because I was using it and trying to test it as a binder, like a chemical binder, so that I wouldn't lose my organic compounds that you typically would lose through natural aeration of the pile. And we'll get a little bit more into that and why that's important. But in that pile, for instance, I've got straw pack from the pens. One of our neighbors grows mint. So as they distill mint, what's left over, the spent mint, the mint puck, they bring that to us, at least the stuff they grow on our farm, because we trade ground with them. And so I have a little bit of that in there. I have quite a bit of the green manure, the pressed manure. In fact, I've been using so much of that this is at the Harper Dairy, our original separator, and it's built similar. It's not making enough for me. So as we have this other one up and going, I think we should hopefully have enough to make all the compost we want to use it. And then so I got the mint, I've got straw pack. I've actually put top straw bales that the guys don't like to use for bedding because they're starting to rot or they're wet and they're hard. And so we use those in the pile as well. I might have a few feed tailings in there, although I don't really like using the feed tailings for a couple reasons. And then I put the clay on there. And then that was us turning. As you can see all the steam coming off of that. Those piles get hot. You can't put your hand in there. It'll burn them. We typically like to stick around at 130, 140 degrees. That's killing the pathogens in the compost. And we'll hold those temperatures. They say you only have to hold them for, depending on the temperature. Say if you're going to be about 140, they say really if you want to kill pathogens, 3 days at 140 to kill the pathogens. We usually hold that temperature and try not to go above it because you're going to start burning up, making ash. But we'll hold that for at least 2 weeks, if not 4 if we can get it. And that first 4 weeks is critical for the breakdown process. In those first 4 weeks, we're going to be going from 100% volume, what we started with, down to 50% volume. Keeping the same weights, we're just becoming more dense, but it's an impressive process, really. So in the composting process, we're building our lines to start with. We're turning our lines, getting the aeration, getting rid of the CO2 out of the middle of the pile, getting oxygen back into it. Oxygen is really a driving force for the breakdown process. And then we maintain the temperature, keep it at that 130, 140 degrees. Maintaining moisture is another big thing. So that's kind of the difference between what we're doing for bedding compost and what we're doing for the field compost is maintaining the moisture. In the bedding, our goal essentially is to heat it up, kill the pathogens, get it clean, and then essentially shut it off. Dry it out, get it dried out, get it cured so that it can be comfortable for the cows. However, in the field compost, I'm taking it all away. So I'm maintaining moisture, so I actually have to add moisture. So I start out with 50% moisture, but then I need to maintain that. And without putting water on that pile, I can't maintain that moisture. So we have an old water truck that we've had for, I don't know how long. It's been a lifesaver for chopping hay for us. But I built a little, I took a drill pipe and built a little arm that sticks off the end and just kind of sits over the pile. And as I drive along the pile, I'm just squirting water on top of it. And depending on how much water, I'll go faster, slower, go over it twice, whatever I need. And then the compost turner will go over that and mix that in immediately so that we're not losing all that water. And so then that water is critical for the breakdown throughout the cycle. But I shouldn't say more importantly, but just as important as breaking down, I mean, a lot of times we miss the build-up portion. So when I first got into this, a gentleman kind of turned me on to it. His whole thing, maybe you've heard of him before, but his whole thing is you break down and you build back up. And what are we building back up? That's where the humus comes into it. So we've got a lot of humic ions. I have tests from early on in the process. I had all my pre-sample tests, my pre-compost tests, and then I think 8 weeks after I started, so about my halfway point, I took another test, sent it off. Sent it to Midwest Labs at the time. I wasn't really familiar with lab process through the U.S., but that's the one that guy suggested, Midwest Labs, and he'd been working with them for years. And they tested and kind of showed me where my humic ions are. And then as I was to build up, you'd expect your humic ions to be used up in that process to make your, what he called a humus protein, essentially a food for microbes. This is what they're going to feed off of and basically live around in the compost. And so I saw that. I saw my humic ions spike about 8 weeks. My breakdown process was pretty well done, and I'm starting my build back process. And then they started coming down. And then there's a curing process at the end, just stabilizing that protein, stabilizing the nutrients that are in there, making sure that, there's no, I can take a handful out of that, smell it, and zero ammonia, none. I have no ammonia, no manure smell. It smells earthy, it smells rich. I actually had a 5-gallon bucket that I was going to bring, but I had car troubles on the way down here, so I switched cars and forgot to switch it in the other car. So I'm kind of disappointed about that. Here's another video, just us turning. This is our compost turner. I think this will be the 4th year we've had it. It's been pretty good to us, but it's expensive. But I feel like, we felt like we can justify that because we can go through so much material. Well, the whole goal of this turner, and really a good turner, if you're going to buy a good turner, what you should be looking for, something that's really handling the product. That same guy that I've been talking to, he actually builds and he designed a turner that I think is probably one of the better ones on the market. And this one's built very similar. That it handles every particle. So it's really flipping it up. It's taking the stuff that's on the bottom and bringing it up to the top, just the way the paddles are angled. The stuff that's on the bottom, eventually gets back on the top. Stuff that's on the top will make it down to the bottom. And with that, there's still a little bit of sludge at the bottom, stuff that's going anaerobic. It's kind of nasty, it's slimy. And so we'll actually go through, especially early on, and we'll take a front end loader and just flip that line, just flip it over onto the dry dirt and just move everything over. And it actually, you can tell a difference. As soon as you do that, your compost makes an immediate change. It's pretty impressive how that happens. And part of that is to get rid of that anaerobic stuff. I mean, that's a big part of it. Get it on dry ground. I mean, the ground's not really soaking up much moisture, with it being just a clay, hard clay, packed down piece of ground, but the difference it makes, I mean, in 2 days later, you can tell that it's broken down and progressing. So here's what we're looking for. These are 2 pictures. I made 2 different lines this year, both with different recipes. The one on the left, you can tell, is a little bit more moist. And that is my original recipe, pretty much, minus the clay. I didn't do clay this year. So I've got straw pack in there. I've got the green waste, the pressed manure in there. I didn't do any straw bales, actually. I just used the straw pack. And then I've got mint. And then the picture on the right is 100% mint and green waste, and that's it. Maybe a little bit of raw manure got spread onto it, which we do that at times to bring up the initial moisture level. And I wish I would have had that bucket with me. You can grab a handful, no nasty smell, nothing volatile, no ammonia. That's a big thing with a lot of compost that you see. You take a handful, sometimes it'll smell strong of ammonia, burn your nose. That's a sign that it hasn't gone through the nitrogen cycle all the way. The color, it's dark, it's rich. The texture, and this one on the left, maybe you get a little bit of residue still on your fingers. It's not quite done all the way. The one on the right, it's dry. It's you take a handful and you can look at it closely. You have little aggregates in there, little compost aggregates, which are promising for holding that microbial life. The humic load, I haven't really found a good way to test that, other than you can take a handful of it, put it in a jar of water, mix it up, take some cheesecloth or some sort of coffee filter or something, dump it out, squeeze the water out, and then depending on that color, I've been told this, and I haven't done it yet, but I've seen the lady who was explaining it to me. You take that water and you look at the color. And so you'd get 2, she said, go to the grocery store and get 2 chocolate bars. Get a milk chocolate and get a dark chocolate. The milk chocolate, if that compost water looks, they call it basically compost tea is what it is. If it looks like the milk chocolate, then you're high in fulvic acid, which isn't a bad thing. It's just what your compost is. And if it's dark and basically black, like the dark chocolate, you're high in humic acid. And so that's really the only thing I have currently to maybe test that. Bacterial and fungal load, that ratio, I don't really have a good way of testing that either. A gentleman in the last class maybe said, I can't remember what the lab was, they could maybe, what's that? Possibly. Do you? Oh, really? Okay, yeah. And he said another one, I can't remember what it was. Ward lab, I'll have to keep that in mind. Maybe I'll talk to you afterwards. I've heard microscopes. That Elaine Ingham loves microscopes, and I haven't bid on it yet, but maybe. The benefits. I think that was the last slide I had. Yeah, okay, perfect. How much time do I got? 15 minutes, 20 minutes maybe? So here's the benefits. Frankly, I've only done it for 2 years. I've only applied it to the ground for 2 years. I only have 1 harvest out of it. I don't have the data necessarily to support what I expect quite yet. The only thing I have is a 40-acre field. The first field I put my compost on, 40-acre hay field. I put it on in the fall. It was a first-year hay field. Went and cut it last year and compared it to basically a sister field, half a mile down the road. Got planted the same year, same variety, same conditions. Both fields were actually laser leveled. In fact, this field had more yards moved on it because we changed the way I watered. So maybe you'd expect that one to be worse. However, take it for what it's worth. Like I said, it's only 1 year's worth of data. That 40-acre field produced half a ton per acre more alfalfa than the other field, just down the road, same conditions, same everything. So that's promising. Like I said, take it for what it's worth though. The picture is I went out Tuesday morning. The ground's wet. The snow's melted where I'm at. The ground's wet. It's not frozen anymore. And you can see just the dark pigment, those little particles. That's the compost. So I spread compost in the snow in that field. You can see I took a fingerprint, kind of scraped some of it away just to get the contrast. I'm putting on a light layer. I'm 3 tons per acre. And doesn't seem like a lot, doesn't look like a lot when you're out there. In fact, sometimes you kind of lose your spot. But on where you're spreading if you're not using GPS. But yeah, so I mean, people will say, oh, that's not a ton. Yeah, it's not a ton, but hopefully, year after year, maybe we'll pull that back as we see benefits, just to maintain it. But it's kind of what we found to be the best way to improve our soil structure. Getting to soil structure, for example, and that field's wet. Where I'm at, we got heavy clay soil. And what happens when you walk through wet, heavy clay soil? It sticks to your boots, and you got 20 extra pounds of mud on your boots. I walked in that field, my shoes were clean. And maybe I had a speck of mud on it, but I mean, it's really crazy the difference that it makes. And then, improving soil structure, we got crazy compaction on our headlands, running manure across it all the time. We beat the crap out of those headlands. For example, we go in, we're chopping corn, right? And we're flood irrigation, we're 100% flood irrigation where we're at. We'll go in prior to chopping, the disc will go in, disc the headlands. Where the corn's not growing right at the headlands, we got furrows and checks up there. Disc them out so the trucks don't have to jump on them. And then the trucks go through their first pass. What does the disc do again? Goes across it again. And it does it twice across the headlands, everywhere the chopper goes, to avoid the trucks bouncing. But that's 2 passes of the disc, beating the crap out of it, chopping up all your fungi. And that's where we want to get away from that. But we found, or at least we hope, that this is going to be the best way for us to improve the microbial life, especially in those headlands, but across the field. We're at a dairy, we're hauling manure, we're chopping corn in poor conditions, wet ground, we're leaving ruts. We feel, at least for right now, we can't really get away from tillage. Yeah, we can maybe cut a pass or 2 out, and that's good, that's better than nothing. We've been trying to do that, we've been trying to maximize what we've got. But if this can do what we want it to do, I think that's our best shot at being progressive, being, the financial savings is going to be big for us. But at least for now, for what we've got, and especially with the resources we have, we feel like this is our best shot at improving our soil the quickest, most efficiently. And so I don't have a ton of research data to support it. I hope to have that in the next few years. But I guess maybe I'll go back to the financial savings as well. Financially, and they asked in the last class, what's the value of that compost? And just based off of NPK numbers, because, especially with our agronomists and fertilizer guys, they're all NPK, what's your value? And we do change our fertilizer rates depending on, what our NPKs are, just so we're not putting too much stuff on there. We figured we're about $45 a ton, and that's what I've been selling it. I sold a little bit to a sod farm just north of us. Been selling it for $45 a ton. My cost into it, I'm maybe 20. Try to get it closer to that 15, just with man hours and everything. Sometimes you're a little high man hours and fuel. Try to be 20. And I've had people tell me, especially our agronomists, like, fertilizer prices are going crazy. People are going to be looking for compost. You should probably be selling it more than $45 a ton. So could I? Yeah, probably. But at this point, I don't have enough to even support my entire farm. So I've sold very little this year to anybody. A little selfish, I guess, but yeah. And then the other thing, at least this is what caught my attention, what caught my eye, caught my passion, I guess, is increasing the nutrient availability. So in this whole conference, we've heard, increasing your soil structure and improving the soil and microbial life basically around that plant root, and how that exudates and the microbes work together to increase nutrient availability and uptake. I saw a graphic, maybe I should have included it, but going over nutrient gradients, I think, and like uptake, availability, and gradients. And there's certain nutrients, and I don't remember exactly which ones, but they're at a tier list basically. So if you're high on the tier list, you're getting in the plant. I mean, you're just going to be the uptake's greater. Stuff at the bottom of the list, I mean, you have to work your way down the list, and so the plant can kind of bypass that gradient with the microbes and say, oh, I want this. Yeah, it's low on the gradient list, but I need it. So send out an exudate. And then, you get the bacteria, the fungi to produce it. You got nematodes that are going to be feeding on that, pooping it out, and then, now it's soluble and plant can uptake it. So that's where I want to get to. That's kind of my goal, what I'm looking into. Elaine Ingham, that's her big thing, if any of you know her. I've learned a lot over her little masterclass things that she has posted on YouTube. That's kind of what I do. And I sit there in the tractor, I'll throw a 3-hour YouTube video on, just listen to it. But, so I'm still learning a lot. I'll probably always be learning, experimenting with the recipe, experimenting with the fields. But yeah, that's about all I got for you. Unless you got any questions. Yeah. Yeah, so we have been doing cover crops the last couple of years, mainly so we've got a alfalfa for 5 years, corn, double crop corn for about 3 years, and then straight corn for another 2 years, and then we'll throw a cereal grain in there. Currently we've been doing triticale for seed, and then that'll go back into alfalfa. That's kind of been our rotation. So when it's in cereal grain and it's not going alfalfa, we've been going cover crop. Just timing works for us in the summertime, get the most out of it. And this year's the first year I've just straight up put compost, just spread it out on top of the cover crop. And we'll see how that works. I mean, that field will get tilled, so that cover crop will then get tilled in. Hopefully just like one pass should be good, and then we'll plant corn into it. We'll see how that works. We're looking at this year will be the first year that we'll be interseeding, so we'll see how that works. But I mean, I have zero intentions of spreading compost and tilling it in. Like, I don't have to mix it in, I don't think, if that answers your question. But I've also heard of, so that same gentleman I talked to the first time kind of got me into this process. He was a proponent of growing high-producing cover crop, and he didn't have the means to graze it off, and he claims he can compost it in ground. So whether that works or not, he sells a product, bugs in a jug basically, and so he'll swath it down, spray those bugs on there, till it in. He claims that he can get it composted in soil, but whether or not he can, I have no idea. But yeah. Anything else? Yeah. I have not. No, I have not. Right. In the long windrows?
Yeah, they just have a huge pipe going all the way out. They have positive and negative aerating systems, so the negative ones are ones they typically use to create instead of
Yeah, I'm about a 14-week process, start to finish. Really? Yeah, I don't know much about it, to be honest. So I've heard, well, so Elaine Ingham, and I don't know municipal stuff, but her big thing is, I don't know. She claims that, a lot of that stuff's not compost, whether it is or not. Yeah, so she calls it like a putrefied organic mash. Yeah, and so actually, that's interesting because I want to use wood chips this year. I want to get my hands on wood chips. Wood chips are a good source of fungi, and I want to use that. But I'm still going to be a 14-week process. I mean, that's just what I'm going to be. But yeah, I haven't looked in. I know nothing about negative aeration systems, so. Mm-hmm. Right. Interesting. Thank you. So I started with the expensive mixer because that's what we already had. So I've been 2 years on this and I've spent $17,000 total, and I didn't even have to spend that much. Yeah, at least. So to get into it, compost turner is going to be a big expense. I'm looking at another one right now. I'll be demoing it next week. It's going to be a pull behind. Whether we buy it or not, I don't know, because we're going to have another compost yard at that other facility. Well, it's do you know Aeromaster Systems? It's essentially the same thing as that, self-propelled. Yep. Really? So that's where this is the second year I've applied, at least to that hayfield. Everything else first year. Oh, yeah. And that's, I mean, I'm selling it to my neighbors. So it's like, do I want to charge them $100 a ton, especially when I don't have any data for it? No. And so, $45 a ton, that's what the value is of NPK for what's in that compost. We felt comfortable there, but yeah, I would imagine that if we sell, it's going to be more than that. And we've looked into possibly doing commercial, retail, I guess, retail stores, bagging it, putting it for the general consumer. It's kind of expensive to get into as well, but we haven't pounced on that, I guess I should say, because of our lack of product. We don't have any excess. So, I mean, at least, I don't know, who's from Cache Valley? Anybody? Nobody? Okay. Miller's, you bought Miller's compost in the store. They're a big composting facility in Cache Valley. They're kind of the same. People compare them to like municipal. They put a lot of cardboard, sheetrock, stuff like that in their compost, break it down. So a lot of people will say, oh, well, that's not a true organic compost. Whether it is or whether it isn't, I don't know. I think that's kind of the benefit, though, that I have over that is currently I have no woody source. If I put a woody source in there, I don't think you'll ever know. I've seen operations that are using wood chips from a tree trimming service or whatever. You'd have no idea it's got wood in it. Zero. Yeah, it just looks like rich dirt. But, yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yep, the salt buildup is a problem. And where I'm at, I have salt in my water, my irrigating water. So I've got an issue. And I'm dairy compost, dairy manure, high in salt. However, with that being said, I'm currently applying liquid manure. Those fields are loaded with salt. and I'm flood irrigation, so I can kind of justify it. Oh, I'm going to flood it out, and it's going to seep down. We have tile drains in all of our fields. That water comes out salty. And I'm north of the Great Salt Lake, so all my ground's salty. If it sits there too long, I've got salt patches, so that's just what it is. But with the compost, yeah, my salt's maybe a little bit higher than what you can buy in the store, but compared to what I'm doing with liquid manure, pales in comparison. I'm nowhere in the salt. I'm only putting 3 tons per acre, and then I'm watering it in the spring. The salt's a non-issue for me, at least the way that we see it. So we talked to our agronomist about it, and we were concerned about it because, you look at what compost should be, and my salt levels are high. Oh no, are we going to kill what we're planting? Are we going to have germination problems? And we haven't had any. So yeah. Anything else? I'm about out of time. Maybe. Okay. Well, thank you for all for coming, and appreciate it.